Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Invasive Plants in Pinellas County. My name is James Stevenson, and I am with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences Extension in Pinellas County. We are an extension of the University of Florida right here in the county, and we provide research-based information on a variety of topics to allow the citizens of our county to make informed decisions. And it's important, of course, to make informed decisions when it comes to invasive plants because of our natural areas. Now, we don't necessarily need to worry about, well, we should, but people don't generally worry about plants escaping in urban situations. But here in our small county, Pinellas County, being nearly 98% built out, our limited amount of natural area is what is threatened by these species, disrupting what would be an otherwise pristine native environment. And Brooker Creek here in Pinellas County, like I mentioned, our largest preserve, we're 50% upland, 50% freshwater wetland. And here we have a look at some of that pristine native landscape and the threats that invasive species could pose. I sent you all an email earlier on that's a list of the known invasive plants that are loose in the state. These are plants that are established, are reproducing, and have proven to be disrupting native populations of plants and denying the other wildlife that depend on those native plants access to the resources that they require. Now, this list is not regulatory. There are no invasive plant police. Some people find that very unfortunate, but there's not the will and not the funding for that kind of thing. This is for decision makers. This is for landowners. This is to help people make decisions about which species to target if there are non-natives on the sphere, the land where the landowner has sphere of influence. So it could be land as small as just a single yard, or it could be used by ranchers and larger landowners as well.
Hey, James.
Hey.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you mind sharing your screen again? I don't think we're seeing your presentation.
I am screen sharing. Okay. Share screen. Is that better?
No, Lara's coming.
Okay. Sorry, folks, just gonna hang on for just a second.
Thank you all for bearing with us.
Stop share. Share screen. Invasives.
You want to go one to the left.
You're good, James. Thank you.
Thank you. So here we have the FLEPC, the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. That's what this name stands for. As I mentioned, it's not a regulatory list. It's for decision makers, and plants are categorized as prohibited, noxious, and category 1 and 2. Now, prohibited and noxious plants are those that are actually regulated, and there's only a handful of plants that are on that list. Category 1 and 2 are the majority of the plants on this list. Category 1 plants are the really, really baddies. That's where you would find like the air potato that we just saw. And category 2 are the ones that we've got our eye on. You might be surprised in today's presentation how many plants that are still available are category 1 invasive plants. And I'll show you a couple of category 2 invasive plants. Now, the category 2s are beginning to appear in natural areas. And that, as I mentioned before, is where non-native exotic plants pose the greatest threat in disrupting native wild areas. Now, the list is composed by a large committee. It's not one person's idea of what constitutes an invasive plant. It's a consortium of experts in the field, including the University of Florida, different water management districts, the Department of Agriculture, Native Park, National Park Service, and so on. Several members of the private sector as well that lend their expertise, as sometimes it's the enthusiastic amateurs that can collect quite a lot of decent information about what's going on out in the wilds. So if we were in person, I would like to ask everyone what they thought would make a plant invasive, but as today's presentation is being recorded and to help keep things moving along, just think to yourself, what would make a plant invasive? And the answers are pretty simple. Looking at the picture in the background of the kudzu, a non-native plant that's probably familiar to even the lay person as a very aggressive invasive plant. More importantly, what are the consequences of a native plant, a non-native exotic plant becoming established? The negative effects on biodiversity are probably first and foremost. What happens oftentimes when you have an introduced species that does begin to reproduce in the wild, and this is true of animals as well, but of course today's presentation is just plants, you end up with what's called a monoculture. So you end up with just one plant dominating an entire ecosystem. And you know, what's wrong with that? It can provide food for things and it can provide fruit and all, but it's just one thing. And a healthy environment has a rich, rich biodiversity. The presence of the plant can lead to habitat loss. Certain animals and certain other plants require certain species to be around, and in the absence of those, the other species can't exist. Endangered species, I mean, they're already under enough stress as it is, but then to introduce a plant that disrupts their habitat and their ecosystem, it makes life even harder. There's a cost that's associated with non-native plant management. And in county-owned areas, who gets to pay that? That would be us. There's controversy that surrounds non-native exotic plant management. Some people might think that all you would need to do is go into an area and pull a plant out and it's gone forever. And you know, if you're not trained in horticulture and if you haven't been given the information in an easily digestible way, that might seem like a very easy way to control the problem, but it simply isn't like that. And there are different methods used to control non-native plants. And of course, there's some controversy surrounding some of those methods of control. And an increase in a non-native plant load in an area could disrupt the natural fire cycle, causing fires to burn unnaturally hot in certain areas because of the presence of these plants, or it could sometimes keep a fire from burning through a habitat that is actually adapted to that fire. So there's all kind of impacts to the presence of non-native plants. So let's have a look at some of the species. And again, I'd like to mention that a lot of these are available for sale at your big box store. And because there's no plant police and there's no regulation on these invasive plants being out there, it comes down to education. And we hope that you will share something that you learned today about an invasive plant that might be in your sphere of influence or a friend or a family member's sphere of influence. But remember, it's always very important. Don't shake your finger in somebody's face. Nobody likes that. Nobody's going to respond well to that. Provide the education, provide alternatives, and we'll all be a happier people, won't we? Let's start with the flowers and the ferns. And the asparagus fern is not a fern, it's a flower, believe it or not. Here we have the asparagus fern, and you can see in the slide the little tiny white flowers. Now, real ferns do not flower. They reproduce by spores, but the asparagus fern is actually a flowering plant, produces fruit that the birds like to eat. And what's wrong with feeding birds? Birds need food. So we have this non-native plant that produces these juicy red berries that feed our birds. Well, the birds don't need asparagus fern to survive. And what happens is the birds eat the berries, and when they fly off, the seed of the fruit passes through the bird's digestive system and is conveniently planted somewhere else. And that somewhere else might be a natural wild area. Here's a shot of those little red berries. Now, this plant is still available for sale. It's a very widely used landscape plant. And almost all of the plants in today's presentation were introduced by horticulture as ornamental plants that do everything that you would want a landscape plant to do. They're evergreen, they're bomb-proof, you can't kill them, they'll survive in drought and flood, they're invincible, and those situations where it makes the plant desirable also makes them very tenacious invasives. The wild taro is an aquatic plant, although it's used in a lot of landscapes to give that tropical look. It doesn't have to grow in water, but it's most adapted to live in water, and it has invaded our waterways, impacting things like navigation in certain areas, an impact on recreation in that instance. And of course, being a tourist economy, we have something that's disrupting our recreation. We need to deal with that so that people can enjoy our waterways. But there are lots of different cultivars of the wild taro. Some are variegated, some have these really interesting purple petioles here. So there's lots of different cultivars of this plant that are out there for sale. And I worked at a nursery in North Carolina where we would sell a single one of these plants for about $25. And here it is loose in a waterway here in Florida, running rampant. Poor old lantana. Everybody loves lantana. This is a landscape plant that's been around forever and ever. It's an evergreen. It flowers most of the year. And most importantly, it's a magnet for butterflies. So it's with heavy heart that we inform you, if you didn't already know, that lantana is a pretty bad weed in natural areas. So what's the problem? It provides nectar for butterflies. What's wrong with that? It flowers year round. It produces berries that feed the birds that drop the seeds somewhere else. Well, it's one of those plants that can disrupt a biodiverse community, and you end up with nothing but lantana. So it's a disruption to otherwise imperiled species in particular wild areas. The Boston fern, very popular hanging basket plant. Again, it's bomb-proof. You almost can't kill the Boston fern. It'll actually tolerate quite a lot of sun, unlike some of our other fern species. Sometimes it's called the tuberous sword fern or just the sword fern. Tuberous because it is the only member of this genus Nephrolepis and the only fern in Pinellas County that produces these tubers underground, these swollen stems that ostensibly help this plant through dry times by concentrating some fluids in this tuber and allowing that plant to, again, like I mentioned, survive a drought. Here's a picture taken at Moccasin Lake about 6 years ago. And you can see, when I mentioned earlier, this concept of monoculture, there's nothing but Boston fern in the understory of this small wood. This one can also find its way up into the boots of our native and non-native palm trees. So oftentimes if you see a very narrow-leaved fern up in the crown of a palm tree, it could very well be this Boston fern or tuberous sword fern. The plant pictured behind me here, Ruellia simplex, the Mexican petunia, another very, very popular landscape plant, evergreen, flowers most of the year, can survive in a parking lot. In fact, they do. But this plant has become very disruptive in our wetlands, in our freshwater wetlands. It's in a family closely related, but not quite in the mint family. It's a sister family to the mints, and it has an interesting method of dispersing its seeds. It has a mechanical ejector button on its fruit. So when the fruit is ripe, it dries, and then it shoots out seeds at quite a distance, up to about 3 or 4, maybe 5 meters. So quite a shot. And if you think about each one of these flowers producing upwards of 10 seeds, you can do the math and just figure out how fast this thing can start spreading around. I've never grown this plant, but I have been told that once you have it, it takes quite an effort to get rid of. Apparently it has very, very, very deep and tenacious roots. So this one is going to take repeated efforts. And that's true of most invasive exotic plants. And as I mentioned before, you can't just pull them once and the problem is over. If any small amount of root is left in the ground, the plant is going to be back. And oftentimes it's going to be back twofold, because now you've broken a stem, that stem is going to fork, and then you're going to have twice as many flowers. And so that's why other methods are so important other than just pulling. How many have wax begonia in their bedding schemes every year? Yep, this is one that we have our eyes on. This is one of the category 2. So this is one that we have our eyes on. We have found this plant reproducing in the wild. It has not quite yet shown the propensity to disrupt a native area, a natural habitat, but we're watching it. Here at Brooker Creek, we have 3 buildings, and anytime you just disturb or bring materials into a natural area, unfortunately, these tiny little propagules are going to come along with it. And we actually have wax begonia established in small quantities, manageable quantities, around the footprint of our buildings. So even here where we teach invasive plant, teach people about invasive plants and management and all these kinds of things, we're no different. We've got these just like many homeowners have as well. The life plant has another name that's a little bit more descriptive. It's called mother of millions, like that's a good thing. It has these funny flattened stems that look like leaves, and all along the edge, they have little buds that can grow into an entirely different new plant. Each leaf on this bank of mother of millions has these funny leaf-shaped stems that can produce 5, 7, 10, 20 new plants. It's a flowering plant, so it can also reproduce by seed, but it's most often by these asexual propagules and their flattened stems. This is one that's actually a curiosity because it has this ability that's interesting, and folks might grow this plant just to watch it do its little trick. But then once it gets established, it's out there forever. Speaking of forever, Wooddelia has been a very popular landscape plant for a very long time. Ticks all the boxes. Evergreen, flowers most of the year, can't kill it, grows in the sun, grows in the shade, everything. But as such, it has become an established nuisance, and there are alternatives. There are alternatives to all of these plants. And when I send you the link to the recording of today's presentation, I will also include a copy of the landscape guide that offers you with alternative plants to use instead of these, and oftentimes native plants. Of course, we advocate for native plants. So those are some flowers and ferns. We'll move on to a couple of vines. And there is a vine that used to be ornamental, and it was grown annually as a shade plant. This is the air potato. And this wasn't necessarily an ornamental plant, but it had horticultural applications in that you could plant this around your screen porch during the summer, and it would grow up the screen and completely shade the porch. So in one growing season, it can completely cover your screen. And then up east, where that was most popular, these potatoes could be brought inside, overwintered, because the plant itself won't survive over winter north of the panhandle. And then you would put the tubers back out in the spring, allow that plant to grow up and shade your porch again, and so on. So that was, no chance of that plant becoming established because the winter would kill off the tubers. Well, here in Central and South Florida, those tubers overwinter just fine. And as a result, each vine producing 20 or so of these propagules They fall on the ground when the plant dies back in the winter, and then in the spring, they've survived, so they begin to grow again. There is a biological control for air potato, and it has proven quite effective. And biological control is a management option for non-native plants, but even biological controls can be very controversial. And without education, and if someone were just to come into an area and say, hey, we're going to release this non-native beetle to take care of the air potato, and it might bite, something like that. You're going to freak people out. But if you do the right amount and type of education beforehand, the information about the biological control can be more easily understood. Things like the fact that this beetle, the air potato beetle, is native to the same part of the world where the air potato came from. And it only eats air potato in this particular species, Dioscorea bulbifera. We have native Dioscorea. And so it took years and years and years of research to make sure that this air potato beetle wasn't going to decide that it prefers our native over this invasive exotic. And it turns out that it won't eat anything else. So we have these colonies of these beetles established in various areas where they've been released. They are available. They are free. They used to be provided by the University of Florida, but now the FDACS, Consumer and Agricultural Science, the State Department, does make these available. I checked, and they're out of beetles right now. They should be available again in October, which is just about enough time to get a beetle colony established that'll overwinter and then reemerge in the spring when the air potatoes come back. Another vine that seems so innocent and cute, when you get it when you're sick and somebody brings you a little collection of plants and flowers and there's one of these in there, arrowhead vine. And when it touches the ground, when you throw it out the back door because it's gotten kind of rangy and it touches the ground, it just travels and it travels and it travels until it finds a way that it can climb. It'll climb up the side of your house. It'll climb up a downspout. It'll climb up a tree. And when this plant gets established, the leaves become quite enormous. So they go from this cute little pink kind of spade-shaped leaf to these big lobed leaves that get to be pretty massive, about 2.5 or 3 feet across. And you can imagine if this vine got up to the top of the tree, the weight of those leaves could have a very negative impact on the integrity of the branches of that tree. And it happens. It also happens with its cousin. Yes, a very bad invasive exotic plant that you can find in almost every single doctor's office in the country, because you can't kill it. And nothing kills pothos, as it were. And again, a plant that's very popular house plant, but if it does get established outside, there's nothing that can stop it. Even the most popular and widely available herbicide just rolls off this leaf, doesn't do it any harm. So adding insult to injury, very difficult to control. Chemicals don't work. Hand pulling on this one and persistent, we're talking years to fully eradicate this plant. But in the meantime, it produces oxalic acid in its sap, which is an irritant. So a very irritating plant. And it's not this plant's fault. Don't get me wrong. I'm a botanist. I love plants. But these are organisms, these are species that have been taken away from their home where they were in perfect balance in their own habitats, and they're loose. And it's not their fault. They're just growing as best they can, and there's nothing to stop them, so they're not stopping. And speaking of not stopping, here we have the perfect, what's that holiday with the hearts? Valentine's Day. You get your honey a little sweet pot of this pink vine, and it's really cute. And then you go and you plant it, and it eats your shed. There's a shed under there. And if you look in the background, there's a telephone pole. And I live in Dunedin, and I travel between Dunedin and Clearwater and Largo quite often. And I go up and down this road called Highland, which kind of connects Dunedin and Clearwater. And Someone did plant this species at the base of a telephone pole, ostensibly to hide the ugly telephone pole in their yard. It's gone all the way up to the top, and it's now crossing the wires, and it's crossing the street. It's drawing across the street like a curtain. So this is another species that just doesn't have anything to stop it. It's called the coral vine, and it might be familiar to you. We'll now look at some trees and some palms and some shrubs, some of the woody plants. So even trees can be nuisance, invasive, exotics, displacing and disrupting native and natural habitats. I rent a place in Dunedin, and I am unfortunate enough to live in the shadow of 2 seedlings of this tree, former seedlings and now full-grown trees, constantly raining down little leaflets. These leaves are divided into tiny little divisions. If you can see in this picture, the little divisions there, those are constantly raining down. The flowers, pretty powder puff. This is a fast-growing shade tree, so of course it has all these things, quote-unquote, going for it. As far as an ornamental plant, it's fast-growing, it's flowering. Unfortunately, it makes these kind of ugly, papery legumes that dry when they're ripe, and they fly off in the wind because they're paper thin, and their seeds just rattle and scatter everywhere and germinate. So it is a messy tree, and it has found its way into our natural areas. A relative of that, another legume, is the orchid tree. Now these have very showy flowers. I mean, who wouldn't like this tropical orchid tree in their yard? I mean, lovely. Well, it gets loose, that's why. Not such a problem in Pinellas County yet. We have had enough near freezing and freezing temperatures to kind of knock this tree for a loop. And it hasn't quite recovered. Specimens haven't quite recovered. In sheltered areas, you might find a very beautiful tree, but most of the trees that I've noticed in the county are kind of stunted, not really capable of reproducing all that much. But as our summers and as our winters continue to get warmer, and we get fewer and fewer and eventually no near freezes or frosts, these plants are going to be ready to take over the world. Big controversy down in Fort DeSoto. The Australian pines were planted there just to back before we had the education that we do. The idea was that they would stabilize the shifting sands. Well, the sands need to shift. That's quite natural. And stabilizing shifting sands is not a good idea. And add to that, the Australian pines weren't even very good at doing it. But they became very, very established and became a monoculture of Australian pines with absolutely nothing underneath in the understory. This being realized years later, and in fact in the past 5 or 6 years or so, it was decided that this invasive species needed to be removed because it was disrupting this coastal habitat. And so, without education, these trees started being chopped down, and people went bananas because what are you doing chopping down trees? How dare you chop down a tree? That's like the opposite of conservation, to chop down a tree. So again, we're providing information today that hopefully you can share among your friends and family about why it's important, what these species are. The people who introduce them are not evil people. We just have these unintended consequences of these species becoming established in our native and natural areas. Camphor trees are everywhere. I probably shouldn't have moved into the house where I moved because I also am in the shadow of a very large camphor tree, and it was once a little seedling. It was not planted. It was planted by a bird. You can see the berries of the camphor tree. Very tasty, especially to crows, interestingly. They will pick the ripe fruit off a camphor tree and fly off and deposit them everywhere. And these seeds have a very high germination rate. So we've got lots and lots of seedling camphor trees all over the place. If you've been around a camphor tree, you might have noticed that nothing eats the leaves. Nothing. It has lots of nice poisons and chemicals in there that prevents it from being eaten, which makes it a very lovely evergreen tree. These were planted. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, it's loose. There's a champion one of these things that has a plaque in a park, and people bring it sacrifices and everything. I don't know, on Gulf to Bay. So again, obviously a little bit of education had gone amiss. And if you tried to chop this thing down now, can you imagine? So that's why we have to help people identify these things. So when the seedlings of this champion tree start showing up in our neighborhoods and in our natural areas, we can get them before they get to be huge. Have you heard of carrotwood? Carrotwood was a very popular landscape plant. Again, a fast-growing evergreen shade tree. What more could you want? Well, you could want less. You could want the plant not to produce such copious amounts of seeds that, again, have a very high germination rate. So here it is, being a very lovely front yard specimen with its big evergreen crown, providing shade for the house. But sadly, this homeowner could use a little education, a little gentle education. Again, we're not going to barge up to anyone's house and tell them that they're a bad person because they have an invasive plant in their sphere of influence. The Suriname cherry is a non-native, an evergreen, popular hedge. This can be hedged, so it can form a nice little, between you and the neighbors. And bonus, it produces an edible fruit that's kind of good. So why not? Well, we talked about why not, because high rate of germination of the seeds. We're not the only organisms that like to eat it. Organisms who, like the raccoons and the possums and even the coyotes and some of the larger birds can take the seeds of this plant and deposit them through their excrement far from the parent plant. So that's how the Suriname cherry can and does get around. Schefflera, a lot of people know this one by its genus name, Schefflera, also called the octopus plant or the Australian umbrella tree. Now this one is very, very widely planted around the county. And when I was a kid, the plants were pretty small. And as they have grown and matured, as we all have, they eventually got to an age and a size where they flowered. Now, I never remember seeing this plant flower when I was a kid, and I would have noticed I was that weird. But now they do, and they have these huge branching inflorescences. Each one of these red wands has about 100 little tiny flowers, each one of those flowers producing a seed. So do the math. This is just one of these inflorescences that the plant's going to produce very many of. And the seeds, again, have a high rate of germination, and they come up everywhere. They seem to like to grow on roofs. I've seen quite a lot of these become established in gutters and on roofs, which is interesting. Not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination. Imagine something getting that big on your roof. So even the little variegated Schefflera, the yellow and green one that's everywhere, that one also produces viable seed. So that one is it's inching its way towards becoming a Category 1 invasive plant. Brazilian pepper tree, this one is actually regulated. This one is illegal to possess, grow, transport, sell, all these things. This one has wreaked extreme economic duress on our agricultural communities. The Brazilian pepper tree is actually from Brazil. It was brought into the same species was brought into cultivation twice. That means there was a collection of plants made in one part of Brazil, and it was brought to Florida and produced in the nurseries and planted as the Florida holly. A second collection from a different part of Brazil was brought into cultivation and propagated, reproduced. The two different collections of the same species hybridized. And oftentimes what happens when a hybrid is formed, even a natural hybrid as happened here, well, I kind of have to say a not natural, because the two populations would have never met each other, quote unquote, uh, in the real world. They were collected from different populations that were far apart from one another. So in cultivation, these plants hybridized, and the hybrids had what's called hybrid vigor. So they grew faster, they flowered more, they had more vigor, they had a higher germination rate of their seedlings, and so on. And so entire monocultures became established in agricultural areas, and you can imagine the impact that had. This is a new one on the list, the fan palm. This is one of the, again, you want that tropical look, plant a fan palm. Look at these big giant leaves. And when it gets tall, the leaves kind of change shape, and it can become about a 30-foot tree, the Chinese fan palm. But it too produces viable seed that finds its way into our natural areas and does not provide the ecological services to all of our species that native plants do. Phoenix, the date palms are in the genus Phoenix, and this one, the Senegal date palm, you can recognize this one. It's often multi-trunked. It might be individual plants that are planted together. A single plant might produce several different growing stems, trunks, if you will, but they recline. They have this kind of more horizontal than vertical growth habit. And they produce dates, not dates that we like to eat, but dates that birds, coyotes, again, the usual suspects, raccoons, and so on, can consume and deposit in our natural areas. I'm going to finish up with one that everybody knows, the queen palm. And yes, the queen palm is an invasive exotic plant. It's probably the cheapest palm to purchase if you want that tropical look, because it's so easily propagated. These seeds germinate so easily. We can grow hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these at a very low cost and then sell them at a very low cost. But the fruit, the seed inside the fruit, is viable in the wild as well. Coyotes, its research project showed that coyotes were the #1 vector of getting the seeds of this plant through their digestive system and into our native areas where they like to hide. They'll go out at night, roam our urban areas, eat up the queen palm fruit that's fallen from the tree, and then go back and hide in our natural areas, and in their excrement, the seeds germinate and grow. So the queen palm, can you believe, it's everywhere, is on the list. So that's just a short list of some of the invasive plants that are loose here in the county. So what do we do? Okay, now we know what they are. What are we going to do? Who would you turn to find out how to identify? Have you got it right? Is this what I think it is? What can I do to get rid of it? What are my options? What are my choices? Could I just pull it out once and it'll be gone forever? Where would you turn to help for that? Well, the answer is our very own extension service. That's one of the reasons that we're here. And it's not just because we're really nice people. We provide information for people to help them identify and mitigate issues in this land, in this the bit of the world that you have sphere of influence over. We're best known for our horticultural advice. And the advice is given for free to our citizens to prevent plants from becoming invasive and to prevent plants from escaping from cultivation and getting into our natural areas where they have to be controlled, where money has to be spent to control these. So stopping these plants from getting loose by informing yourself and again, informing others is your best bet. Education is always the best. So you can visit the Extension webpage for lots of information. If you have very good photographs, very good very detailed and good photographs. You can send them to this email address for identification purposes, just to find out what it is. If you have a diseased plant in your landscape, you can also send a very good picture of that species to hort@pinellascounty.org for diagnostic purposes. In normal times, you would be able to bring specimens into the office in Largo. That service has not been started up yet, but really it's just as easy to send a photograph, a really good photograph, did I say that? To help the horticulturists. They'll work on it, they'll get consensus, and they'll get back to you with an answer pretty quickly. So all these invasive plants, what are we going to do? What are we going to replace them with? You know, now that we're excited that we're going to go out in our yard and eliminate these things by hook or by crook, what are our alternatives? Well, when the recording of today's presentation is completed and we've done the subtitles, we will send out everyone who registered a link to the landscape design, the handbook on landscape design and plant selection. So this is Florida friendly. These are the plants, native and non-native, that have not shown yet to become invasive exotics. So we'll send you a link to this. You can even read through the first couple of pages and you can find out where you can get a hard copy of this for yourself. If you ever see this class offered again in person, we'll give you a copy of this at that time. It's actually produced by the Extension Services in Gainesville with the Florida Friendly group. So I appreciate your patience and your attention this afternoon. If you have any questions or comments or complaints, please do let me know. My email address is here on the screen. I'll leave this screen up for a few more minutes as we wrap up today. Next week, Florida Supernature will be an introduction to plant identification. Same place, same time, and you can sign up for that using our link to the series. We've actually added classes now to the end of July, so you can sign up for those classes as well. So again, I'm James Stevenson with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, the Extension Services here in Pinellas County, wishing you a good afternoon and thank you again for joining us.